what really happens is athletes will bend their arms if it's light enough, and they will use their arms to help them move the weight overhead, which is going to be detrimental to the performance of their Olympic lifts. Just a week ago, CrossFit put out an article titled "In Defense of High Rep Olympic Lifts," and today we're going to talk about this article and break it down and give you my opinion as a strength coach and what I see as someone who trains pretty much people of all kinds, and what I see which is applicable to them as far as the use of high rep Olympic lifting. And in this article, it's actually an article responding to Mark Rippetoe, which he wrote an article talking about pretty much the fallacy of high rep Olympic lifting, which is what it's titled. And CrossFit in this article actually links back to that. So if you guys want to see this article or the one that it responds to, both of these links will be in the description of this video, but they'll be on screen the whole time. So I'll just have me here and the articles next to me. So let's not waste any time and get straight into it. This article aims to talk about how there is a lot of rebuttal against high rep Olympic lifts and how coaches who coach CrossFit are somewhat getting confused whether or not that's actually a good approach to conditioning, and that is pretty much what we're going to be discussing today. So the first part is that we see in the article, it talks about how Olympic weightlifting is a cornerstone of an effective approach. So for CrossFit's methodology, they find that Olympic weightlifting is in fact something that's very important to them as far as what they teach and how they go about structuring their programs. And there's a lot of times where Olympic weightlifting is not applicable. And for many athletes, for some athletes it works really well, and for many athletes it's just not applicable to their current training or their current training load, or for whatever reason, it just does not work well and it's not applicable to them. And we're going to get into that in more detail soon. The high rep Olympic lifting, they're classifying it as something that is anything more than 5 reps in a row, or anything more than 1 to 3 reps in and every minute on the minute. So performing reps with minimal rest consecutively over an extended period of time. They're calling that as high rep Olympic lifting. Let's move on and see what else they talk about. So CrossFit's detractors claim that Olympic lifts are dangerous. High rep Olympic lifts is a poor method of conditioning. High rep Olympic lifting doesn't build strength, and high rep Olympic lifts erode a person's technique in the classic lifts. So these are the 4 myths that we're going to get through today, and I have some points that I want to discuss with you guys, so we're just going to get straight into it. The first one is high rep Olympic lifts are dangerous. Now, this is really, really interesting, and there's 2 main points that I want to discuss, and one is injury prevention, and the second one is the concept of technique. So it says here that this is a quote from their article: "If you're coaching CrossFit and you're not adhering to the mechanics, consistency, and intensity charter, then you're coaching CrossFit wrong." This is something that I find really interesting. In my area, from where I'm in Bundoora in Melbourne in Australia, and the gyms, the standard of lifting in the gyms is so varied, and it is still, I would say, at a very low level. The quality of movement is at a very low level, and when they say things like mechanics, consistency, intensity, this is just this is just part of CrossFit's philosophy. It doesn't mean that this is actually being implemented, and that's what I find is most challenging. And when I get members coming from other CrossFit gyms and they want to experience more Olympic weightlifting, and they'll say, "Oh, I didn't realize, I have to keep my arms relaxed," or "I didn't realize the bar has to be close to my body," or "I need to stay active," or maybe I help them with their setup. And a lot of these times it is alarming that these concepts are new to these beginners. And when it says that good technique on the path to fitness, it's very interesting to see that this is something that is just being, it's not being enforced, and it's not being reiterated enough in a lot of these gyms. And maybe they are enforcing technique, but there's technique that the coaches are aware of is not to a good enough standard. So that's something that I'm seeing a lot of. Now, something that's really interesting is injury prevention, and that's something that they talk about in this article here, which is high rep Olympic lifts are dangerous. So that's myth 1. The argument of high rep Olympic lifts dangerous, obviously it depends on how you're going to be performing them, but more often than not, people are performing them quite badly as a standard, and you don't really have to go far. You can just go on Instagram and search up CrossFit, #CrossFit, or #Power Snatch or Power Clean, and I'm sure you can see a lot of average technique. not even high reps, just average technique singles or what have you. Now, myth 2, high rep Olympic lifts are a poor conditioning method. Now, there is a little quote here from, Coach Bergner. So Coach Bergner says, I don't think there's a better test for strength and endurance, while adding that high rep Olympic lifts develop tremendous work capacity and a major carryover to everything else. They make everything better. Now, there are many ways to make your athlete improve. It doesn't just have to be Olympic lifts. And when we look at Olympic lifting, something that's really interesting is there's a number of athletes that are very high level athletes that perform the Olympic lifts, the snatch and clean and jerk, very poorly, and their technique is not very good. They're not lifting particularly heavy weights, or they might not be moving it as well as weightlifters, and that's fine, they're not weightlifters. But something that we see is, I don't think people know, or I don't think people realize how maybe, a small amount of weightlifting in general, it doesn't have to be high rep, it's just a small dose of it can create a neurological response and create change in your athlete and help them improve their performance. But in saying that, there are many athletes, elite athletes, that don't do any weightlifting at all, and they're at a very high level. So it's very interesting to see how there's many different kinds of athletes out there, and a lot of them use their bodies in different ways to produce force. So using a blanket terminology or a blanket method like this fails to kind of focus on the individuality of an athlete, where everyone will respond differently. But I find that small amounts of weightlifting and small amounts of volume can actually produce a really good response in pretty much everyone. So just keep that in mind when you are programming and when you are looking at this information. You don't have to be doing 10 sets of 10 clean and jerks or every minute on the minute for 20-minute snatches. Now, in this section, CrossFit also talks about how the critics of high rep Olympic lifting claim that there are much better ways to condition athletes, like hill sprints and sled pushes. However, these low skill movements do not hone the most important quality of a conditioning program, and that is the ability to handle complex tasks with proper technique in a fatigue state. So we don't always want to give our athletes very complex movements and then request them to perform high skilled movements at a high intensity. Our goal, and this is one of the biggest flaws in the article, and what I find is CrossFit struggles to see that low skill movements are so powerful and so relevant. Your goal as a coach should be to administer the least amount of fatigue and stress on the athlete and to result in the greatest physiological or neurological change that you can give to the person. So low skill movements are very important in all programs. Myth 3, this is a really interesting one. High rep Olympic lifts hurt technique in the classic lifts. Yes, it does. And I often find this to be the case, and they're saying it's a myth. Let's break it down. So athletes performing high rep Olympic lifts, this is one of the quotes. It says they tend to have their hips a little bit higher in more of a deadlift position than a squatty start position. So instead of saying hips lower, which is used for the maximal lifts. The higher hip starting position helps save the legs from fatiguing as much and makes it easier to breathe at the bottom position. It is the most efficient position for touch and go reps. Many athletes use to string reps together. Okay, so now in reality, what you can see, and you just have to go on, like I said, go on Instagram and look up #CrossFit and you will see the standard of lifting. So they're saying that this is more efficient for touch and go reps and the hips a little bit higher helps prevent the legs from being as fatigued. So what really happens is athletes will bend their arms if it's light enough, and they will use their arms to help them move the weight overhead, which is going to be detrimental to the performance of the Olympic lifts. And now you're suddenly taking a movement which is designed to produce lower body power, but they have tension in their upper body, which is affecting the amount of power that they can put into the barbell. That happens. Now we have, if athletes are getting really fatigued in their legs and their quads specifically, they're going to be pulling back excessively on the bar. Now, if this is something that they don't normally do when they're going for a heavy single as such, or when they're going for, more of a lower rep range with less, with more rest. Now, if the legs are going to be fatigued, they're going to be pulling back. And if that doesn't normally happen, then that's going to be obviously a detriment to their technique. If they are pulling back excessively and they're struggling to stay over the bar and keep their knees bent for as long as possible, which I've spoken about on this channel before, the importance of propulsion when you're driving the bar up, that is going to negatively affect their performance in the classic lifts. Now, the final thing I want to talk about is myth 4, and that is high rep Olympic lifts don't make you stronger. Now, there are many ways, like as we've spoken about, if you only have a certain amount of time allocated to training, then there is going to be a higher priority of performing machine exercises, performing basic strength movements like squats, deadlifts, and presses. They're going to be more important into your training than performing the high rep Olympic lifts. Now, high rep Olympic lifting, as far as making it stronger. Now, in this article, they specifically say after a workout like Isabel or 10 clean and jerks at body weight, 3 sets of 1 at 90% in the snatch or snatch balance, and overhead squats feels like a deload. Now, the sensation of a lighter weight is what you're experiencing. You didn't inherently become stronger. So I find it really interesting how they've chosen to come at it at this perspective. We know you can't just interpolate, if you did 10 reps at a certain weight, that it's going to automatically result in a improved single. It might result in improved conditioning or improved rate of recovery, and that is fine. But as far as it resulting in a direct improvement in your top single, it's very hard and very difficult to result. Something like a triple, as soon as you get past 3 reps, it's very hard to see that movement. Say if it's a snatch, 5 reps in a snatch is going to result in an improved single. It means that you have good sound technique for that weight. As you move up in weight, you require more speed and power to be driven into the barbell, because the barbell is now heavier and it will fall heavier. So you need to move under the weight faster. If you cannot do those 2 things as you get heavier, well, then you're not going to make the weight regardless of how many reps you did on a lighter weight. And that's something that I find people struggle with. Many people, you guys can probably relate to this. You can probably, when you're first starting out, you can do 20 reps all day on 40 kilo snatch, and then you go to 60 and suddenly it all falls apart. And that is the importance of being able to put power and speed into the barbell. Let me know what you guys think of the video. Let me know what you guys think of the article by CrossFit. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. These articles will both be in the description. Let me know what you think, and I will see you in the next one.